Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at John chapter 1, verses 35 through 42, meeting Jesus. John chapter 1, verse 35, again the next day. And what's happened is we've had so far 3 days, four in this chapter, 3 days. I call it 3 days in the life of Jesus. But Jesus, we really haven't seen much of him yet. John pointed him out at the end of the second day. Notice again the next day, John was standing with two of his disciples, and he looked at Jesus as he walked and said, "Behold the Lamb of God." So day one, John had spoken to the delegation from Jerusalem about his ministry. They said, "Who are you?" And they had some questions about him. Day two, John publicly introduces Jesus. He says, "There he is. That's the Lamb of God." And then he described the baptism that had taken place at an earlier date. I would suggest much earlier, at least 40 days earlier, because after the baptism, Jesus had gone out into the wilderness, and now he's back. And so there's two of John's disciples. Notice John has disciples, and he repeats what he said before. He's the Lamb of God. But notice he points him out. Behold, the Lamb of God. Verse 37, the two disciples heard him speak, and they followed Jesus. And by this, they literally just followed him. It's not that they've just decided now to become disciples of Jesus. That's going to happen. But initially, they just, Jesus is walking along, and they just walk along after him. And Jesus turned and saw them following, and said to them, "What do you seek?" And that's a question, probably an existential question. And they weren't really sure. So they said, "Rabbi," which translated means teacher. That's what just the term rabbi means. "Where are you staying?" And I think when they say where you're staying, that's just the first thing that comes to mind. They haven't really thought it through yet. They're seeking something, but I'm not sure that they could have put the name to it. What are you seeking? What are you looking for? What's your goal in life? Maybe you haven't verbalize that. Maybe you haven't really come to the place where you have a goal. And so, if you were to give an answer, your answer might be a bit like theirs, just sort of off the top of your head. And but that's what they asked him. Where are you staying? And he said to them, come and you will see." that's that's sort of an open-ended invitation. So they came and saw where he was staying, and I love this next part. They stayed with him that day. I have no idea what they did that day. They just hung out with Jesus. Notice, for it was about the 10th hour. Now, when we look at time in the New Testament, there were two different ways of citing time. You could do it the Hebrew way, which was, the first hour was the first hour after sunup, and then second hour, third hour, fourth hour, and so on. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke all seem to use that Jewish way of reckoning time. But in John's case, I'm not sure he's consistent with them. I think perhaps instead he may have gone over to the Roman way of designating time, which is a lot like ours. So the 10th hour, I think, might have been 10 in the morning. You see, if you look at the other uses of time, you're going to have John chapter 4, verse 6 is the Samaritan woman who comes to the well, and it's about the 6th hour. And I'm not sure that some people said that was high noon. I'm not sure that it was. I think it might have been like 6 in the afternoon, around there. Remember, they didn't have clocks, so they're just judging basically from where the sun is. And then in John 4:52, again, this doesn't really help us distinguish between them, but you have the noblemen who came to Jesus and wanted Jesus to heal his son, but to do it long distance. And the next day he gets back home and his son has been healed. And he says, when did he begin to be healed? And it was about the 7th hour. Um, and again, neither of these are definitive, but the third one I think perhaps is. And that's in John 19:14, when Jesus is going to be before Pontius Pilate, and it will be at the 6th hour. I don't think that's 6 hours after sunrise, because at 6 hours after sunrise, Jesus had already been on the cross, according to the other Gospels. I think that's 6 in the morning. Now, there have been some who've said, well, this is still Jewish time, and what's happening is that he's before Pontius Pilate, but doesn't go to the cross until the next day. I don't think that's a good solution. I think instead that the 6 hour in John's gospel account, in fact, all the references to hours in John's gospel account is using Roman time. I could be wrong, and that's okay if I am. But I think this is probably the better answer. Verse 40, one of the two who heard John speak and followed him was Andrew, Simon Peter's brother. Notice we're not told who the other one who heard John speak. I like to think maybe, and I don't know if this is the case, I like to think maybe it was John, the writer of this account, but that's just speculation. But one was Andrew, and Andrew's sort of interesting because every time we see Andrew, we're going to see him bringing somebody to Jesus. Remember in John chapter 6, verses 8 and 9, where it's Andrew who brings this boy with fish and bread to Jesus. And then later in John chapter 12, there are Greeks who want to see Jesus, and they go to Philip, and then Philip brings them to Andrew, and Andrew brings them to Jesus. Sort of sort of an interesting cause and effect. I think they go to Philip because he has a good Greek name. Well, Andrew's a Greek name too. So, but they go to Philip, and then to Andrew, and then to Jesus. And here again, Andrew is going to bring somebody to Jesus. He's going to begin with his own brother. Notice he's called Simon Peter's brother. You ever stop to think that Andrew's, his claim to fame is his brother? I have an older brother, so I sort of know what that's like. And these days, my older brother lives in Europe. He lives in Germany. And if somebody's in Germany that's a Christian, they very well might know my older brother. They don't know me at all. And likewise, if you're at one of the Bible colleges in the area where I teach, and my older brother might be known as John's older brother. But here, Andrew is known as Simon Peter's brother. Verse 41, he first found his own brother Simon. Now, his name isn't Simon Peter yet. His brother was a good Jewish name, Simon, and said to him, we have found the Messiah, which translated, the word Messiah just means Christ. Messiah is Hebrew, Christ is Greek, and both of those terms have the same meaning. They both mean the one who has been anointed. So Messiah, or our Jewish friends would say Mashiach, and then Christ, or Greek friends would say Christos. But both of those mean the Messiah, or the anointed one, and it's specifically the anointed one that had been promised in the Old Testament. So when he said, we found the Messiah, that's all he needed to say. Simon would have known enough to put that together. Oh, that's the Messiah from our Hebrew scriptures. Verse 42, he brought him to Jesus. Jesus looked at him and said, you are Simon, the son of John. You shall be called Cephas. And just to help us, notice our translators tell us the meaning of that. Cephas is Aramaic. It means rock or rocky, which is translated Peter, which is Greek for rock or rocky. So the terms are the same, whether it's Cephas or Peter. They both have the idea of the rock. Now, at this point, we're not told the meaning. We understand it means Peter. It means rock, but we're not told why he was called the rock. That's going to come up in one of the other gospel accounts, and we don't see that here. But it does tell me that from the very beginning, Jesus had his eye on Peter, whose ministry will be foundational. That's the rock part. Whose ministry will be foundational to what Jesus is going to do. He's going to build up something that we think of as, God's gathering, God's people. We call it the church. And Peter's going to have a very foundational part in building that. And that's okay. So we have 4 days. The first day was, we saw in a previous class where John the Baptist had given testimony about himself and about Jesus. He'd spoken to the delegation from Jerusalem about his ministry. Then on day 2, he publicly introduces Jesus and describes that earlier baptism. Now he points out Jesus to two of his disciples, and they follow, and then one of them goes, Andrew goes and gets Peter. And on the fourth day, what we'll see next time is one more coming, Philip, and then Philip will go get somebody, and he'll bring Nathaniel, who also meets Jesus. And so, in all of these sections, especially these last 2 days, day 3 and day 4, we have people bringing other people to Jesus. And that's the way it's supposed to begin. Notice you have one person and he brings somebody else, and then that person brings somebody else. And notice the first person can bring others as well. And so you have a multiplication process of one bringing another, bringing another. And more than likely, as you were listening to this, there was someone, or maybe several someones, who brought you to Jesus. And the question is, are you continuing that cause and effect relationship? Are you continuing that process of bringing someone else, maybe several someone else's, to Jesus? You don't have to do that in a big crowd. More often than not, it's just the way it's described here. It's one-on-one. But you are called to be part of that process.